The black town car pulled up to the restaurant just after 7 in the evening. Nobody was expecting him. That's how Robert Hayes preferred it. He owned 32 restaurants across the country, and the ones that knew he was coming always put on a show. Fresh flowers appeared out of nowhere. Managers suddenly became extra friendly. The real problems got hidden behind smiles and perfect table settings. But Robert didn't build a restaurant empire by looking at what people wanted him to see. He built it by showing up unannounced and seeing the truth. Les Jardins sat on the corner of 5th and Madison, all glass windows and soft lighting that made everyone inside look like they belonged in a magazine. It was the kind of place where dinner for two could cost more than some people's monthly rent. Robert had bought it 3 years ago, kept the fancy French chef, raised the prices, and watched the profits roll in. Tonight, he was here because the numbers from last quarter looked too perfect. In his experience, when something looked too perfect, somebody was usually lying. The hostess nearly dropped her clipboard when she recognized him. "Mr. Hayes, we weren't expecting. Welcome. Let me get the manager right away." "Don't bother," Robert said, unbuttoning his coat. "Just give me a table. Somewhere I can see the kitchen." She seated him near the back, hands shaking slightly as she handed him the menu. Within minutes, the manager appeared, a thin man named Douglas, who looked like he might pass out from stress. "Mr. Hayes, what an honor. If we had known you were coming, we would have prepared something special. Please, let me have Chef Jean-Pierre create a tasting menu for you." Robert waved him off. "I don't want a performance. Just bring me whatever's good tonight. Whatever you'd serve if I wasn't here." Douglas hesitated. "Of course. The lamb is excellent tonight, and our bouillabaisse is—" "You choose," Robert interrupted. "Surprise me." The manager hurried away, and Robert settled back in his chair. Around him, other diners whispered behind their wine glasses. They'd recognized him too. Great. Now the whole place would be on high alert. He pulled out his phone and started reviewing reports from his Miami location. Numbers, invoices, staffing costs. The business of food was really just the business of numbers, and Robert was good with numbers. He'd grown up poor in Detroit, worked his way through business school washing dishes and bussing tables, and built his first restaurant from nothing but determination and a loan he'd barely qualified for. That was 20 years ago. Now he was worth more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. The waiter brought bread and water. Robert barely looked up. Then came a salad he didn't order, probably something fancy with cheese he couldn't pronounce. He ate it mechanically, still scrolling through his phone. When the main course arrived, he almost sent it back. This wasn't what he'd expected. Instead of some complicated French dish with foam and flowers, the plate held something simple. Braised short ribs, dark and tender, sitting on a bed of creamy grits. Collard greens on the side, cooked down with what smelled like smoked meat and onions. Nothing fancy. Nothing that belonged at a restaurant where appetizers cost $40 dot, but the smell hit him like a memory. He couldn't quite place. Robert set down his phone. He cut into the meat, and it fell apart at the touch of his fork. The first bite stopped him completely. The flavors were layered in a way he didn't expect. Rich and deep, with the short ribs so tender they melted on his tongue. But there was something else, too. A warmth from ginger. A hint of star anise. Asian spices mixed into what was clearly Southern food. It shouldn't work, but somehow it did. Perfectly. The grits were creamy and smooth, with real butter and cheese, not the instant stuff some restaurants tried to pass off as authentic. The collard greens had that slow-cooked depth that only came from hours of patient attention. Robert took another bite, then another. He couldn't remember the last time food had actually made him stop and pay attention. "Is everything satisfactory, Mr. Hayes?" Douglas appeared at his elbow, looking nervous. Who made this? I'm sorry? This dish. Robert gestured at the plate. Who cooked it? Douglas's face went pale. Chef Jean-Pierre, of course. He's been with us for 2 years. Trained in Lyon, worked at 3 Michelin-starred restaurants in Paris before... Get him out here. Sir? The chef. I want to talk to him. Douglas practically ran toward the kitchen. Robert took another bite, trying to place what it was about this food that felt so familiar. It reminded him of something from a long time ago. Sunday dinners at his grandmother's house before she passed. Before everything became about business and profit margins. Jean-Pierre emerged from the kitchen in his white chef's coat, looking confused but confident. He was a tall man with graying hair and the kind of posture that said he knew exactly how good he was. Mr. Hayes, you wish to speak with me? Robert pointed at the plate. This is excellent. Best thing I've eaten in months. Jean-Pierre's chest puffed up. Thank you, sir. I've been experimenting with fusion concepts, bringing traditional French techniques to... What's your grandmother's name? The chef blinked. Excuse me? Your grandmother. The one who taught you to cook greens like this. Jean-Pierre's confidence flickered. I don't understand the question. These short ribs. How long did you braise them? 4 hours at 325 degrees with a red wine reduction and the ginger? The star anise? When did you add those? Jean-Pierre's mouth opened and closed. He looked at Douglas, then back at Robert. Mr. Hayes, I can assure you the dish was prepared to the highest standards. Robert leaned back in his chair. He'd been in this business long enough to recognize a lie. You didn't make this, did you? The silence that followed was louder than any answer. Douglas jumped in, his voice high and nervous. Mr. Hayes, I can explain. We had a situation in the kitchen tonight. Chef Jean-Pierre was overseeing the main stations, and we had a last-minute request, and one of our staff members who sometimes helps with prep work. Who? It's really not important. The quality is what matters, and as you can see, Robert's voice went quiet and hard. I asked you a question. Who made this food? Douglas swallowed. Grace Bennett. She's one of our waitresses. Robert looked around the dining room until he spotted her. She was older, maybe in her 50s, with her hair pulled back in a neat bun. She was carrying a tray of drinks to a table by the window, moving with the kind of efficient grace that came from years of practice. When she set down the glasses, she smiled at the customers, said something that made them laugh, then headed back toward the kitchen. She had no idea that in the next 5 minutes, her entire life was about to change. Bring her here, Robert said. Now, Grace was wiping down table 6 when she noticed Douglas practically running across the dining room toward her. His face had that panicked look he got whenever something went wrong, and her first thought was that she'd messed up someone's order. Grace, I need you to come with me right now, he whispered, his hand gripping her elbow. What's wrong? Did I forget something? Just come. And whatever you do, be professional. Her stomach dropped. In 3 years of working at Les Jardins, she'd never been pulled off the floor during service. She followed Douglas through the dining room, very aware of the other diners watching. When she saw who was sitting at the back table, she understood why everyone looked so tense. Robert Hayes, the owner, the man who signed her paychecks and could end her job with a single word. Mr. Hayes. This is Grace Bennett, Douglas said, his voice tight. Grace smoothed her apron and tried to keep her hands from shaking. Good evening, sir. Is there a problem? Robert looked up at her, and his expression wasn't what she expected. He didn't look angry. He looked curious. Did you make this? He pointed at the half-eaten plate of short ribs and grits. Grace's mouth went dry. Oh no, this was about the food. She'd been helping in the kitchen because they were short-staffed, and she'd put together a quick dish when an order came in and everyone else was slammed. She thought she'd done a decent job, but now the owner was asking about it, and that couldn't be good. "Yes, sir." "I did. I'm sorry if it wasn't up to standard." Chef Jean-Pierre was busy with the other orders, and I was just trying to help out. "Stop apologizing," Robert said. "Sit down," Grace blinked. "Sir?" "Sit." He gestured to the empty chair across from him. Dot Douglas made a strangled sound. "Mr. Hayes, she's working tonight. We have tables that need... someone else can cover her tables." "Sit down, Grace." Grace sat, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. This was surreal. Restaurant owners didn't ask waitresses to sit with them during dinner service. This had to be some kind of test, or maybe she was about to get fired in the most dramatic way possible. Robert pushed the plate toward her. "This is the best food I've eaten in 6 months. Maybe longer. Where did you learn to cook like this?" She stared at the plate, then at him. "You? You liked it? Liked it? I haven't been able to put down my phone during a meal in 2 years. I actually forgot I had a phone while I was eating this. So yes, I liked it. Now answer the question." Grace didn't know what to say. The truth sounded so simple, almost embarrassing, compared to the fancy culinary degrees everyone else in the kitchen had. "My grandmother taught me," she finally said. "Growing up in Georgia. She raised me and my 2 brothers after my parents passed, and she always said that cooking was how we showed love. We didn't have much money, so we had to make simple ingredients taste special. And the ginger? The star anise? Those aren't traditional Southern ingredients." Grace relaxed slightly. At least he was asking about cooking, something she understood. "No, sir. I learned those later. I worked at a Vietnamese restaurant for a few years, in the kitchen there. The owner, Mrs. Nguyen, she taught me how Asian spices could complement different flavors. I started experimenting, mixing what my grandmother taught me with what I learned there. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't." Robert leaned back in his chair, studying her like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "How long have you been cooking?" "All my life, I guess. Since I was 7 or 8. No, I mean professionally." "Where did you train?" Here it was. The part where she had to admit she didn't belong in a place like this. "I didn't train anywhere, sir. I mean, not formally. I've worked in restaurants for over 30 years, mostly as a server. But I've always cooked at home, and sometimes when kitchens are short-handed, I help out." 30 years in restaurants, and you're still serving tables?" Grace felt her cheeks burn. "I'm good at it, sir. I make decent tips, and it's steady work." "That's not what I asked." She met his eyes then, and something in his expression made her decide to be honest. "I almost went to culinary school once. Got a scholarship to the Institute in Charleston. But my mother got sick right before I was supposed to start. Cancer. She didn't have insurance, and my brothers were still in high school. Somebody had to work, and I was the oldest. What happened? She passed 2 years later. By then, my brothers needed help with college, and the scholarship was gone. Life just went a different direction, I guess." Robert was quiet for a moment. Around them, the restaurant hummed with conversation and the clinking of silverware. Grace could feel Douglas hovering nearby, probably having a heart attack over how long she'd been sitting down. "Do you still want to cook professionally?" Robert asked. The question caught her off guard. Nobody had asked her that in decades. She'd stopped thinking about it as something that could actually happen. It was like asking if she still wanted to be an astronaut or a movie star, just a dream from a different life. "It doesn't matter what I want," she said quietly. "I'm 52 years old. Kitchens want young people with degrees and fancy training. I'm just a waitress who makes good Sunday dinner. That's not what this tastes like. Robert tapped the plate. This tastes like someone who understands food on a level that most culinary school graduates never reach. You can teach someone techniques, but you can't teach them soul. And this food has soul. Grace didn't know what to say to that. Part of her wanted to believe him, but the bigger part had learned not to hope for things that seemed impossible. Robert pulled out his phone and made a quick call. Chef Jean-Pierre? I need you in the kitchen tomorrow at 6 a.m. No, I don't care that you don't start until 10. 6 a.m. We're doing a test. He hung up and looked at Grace. Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning, you're going to come in and cook this dish again. I want to watch you make it from start to finish. I want to see how you work, what you do, and why it tastes this good. Sir, I have the evening shift tomorrow. I can't. I'm changing your schedule. Douglas will work it out. 6 a.m. Don't be late. Grace's mind was spinning. I don't understand. Why does it matter? You have Chef Jean-Pierre. He's trained in France. He's cooked in Michelin-starred restaurants. Why do you care about how I make short ribs? Robert stood up, pulling out his wallet. He laid down several bills on the table, far more than the meal cost. Because in 20 years of owning restaurants, I've learned something important. The fanciest training in the world doesn't mean anything if the food doesn't make people feel something. And your food made me feel something I haven't felt in a long time. He buttoned his coat and looked at her one more time. 6 a.m., Grace. Bring whatever ingredients you need. We'll have everything set up. Then he was gone, leaving Grace sitting at the table with her mind racing. Douglas appeared at her shoulder immediately. What just happened? He asked. I have no idea, Grace said honestly. But as she stood up and smoothed her apron, getting ready to go back to her tables, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize what it was. Hope, and it terrified her, because hope was dangerous. Hope meant you could be disappointed. Hope meant you might start believing that, maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to want something more than what you had. Grace picked up her order pad and went back to work, trying to ignore the way her hands were shaking. Tomorrow morning would come soon enough. And whatever happened after that, well, she'd deal with it the same way she'd dealt with everything else in her life. One step at a time. Grace hadn't slept much. She'd gone home after her shift, laid out her work clothes for the morning, and then spent 2 hours staring at the ceiling, wondering what she'd gotten herself into. At 4:30, she gave up on sleep entirely and got up to make coffee by 5:45. She was standing outside Le Jardin in the pre-dawn darkness, her hands wrapped around a travel mug for warmth. The street was quiet, just a few cars passing by, and a man walking his dog on the other side. Inside the restaurant, she could see lights on in the kitchen. She took a deep breath and pulled open the door. Robert was already there, sitting at the bar with his own coffee, typing something on his laptop. He looked up when she came in. You're early. Habit, Grace said. I'm always 15 minutes early for everything. Good trait. He closed his laptop and stood. Chef Jean-Pierre is in the kitchen. I had Douglas stock everything you might need, but if there's something missing, just say so. Grace followed him through the dining room. Her shoes echoed on the hardwood floor, and everything felt different without the customers and the noise. Just empty tables and chairs, waiting for another day to begin. The kitchen was bright and clean, everything in its place. Jean-Pierre stood near the main prep station, arms crossed over his chest. He didn't look happy to be there. Good morning, Grace said quietly. He nodded once, barely, and said nothing. Robert didn't seem to notice the tension. Or maybe he did and didn't care. All right, Grace, show me what you do. Pretend we're not here. That was easier said than done. Grace could feel both men watching, as she washed her hands and looked over the ingredients Douglas had set out. Short ribs, onions, garlic, ginger, star anise, chicken stock, fresh collard greens in a colander, stone ground grits in a bag. She touched the short ribs, checking their thickness and marbling. Good quality meat. That would help. First thing, she said, more to herself than to them, you have to season the meat properly. Not just salt and pepper. You need to let it know what's coming. She pulled out a cutting board and started working, her hands moving with a kind of confidence that only came from doing something thousands of times. Mincing garlic, cutting fresh ginger into thin slices, crushing the star anise slightly to release more flavor. Most people think cooking is about following recipes, she said, falling into the rhythm of the work. But my grandmother used to say cooking is about listening. You listen to the food. You pay attention to what it needs. She heated oil in a large Dutch oven, waiting until it shimmered just right, then carefully placed the short ribs in, one by one. They sizzled immediately, and the smell of searing meat filled the kitchen. The browning is everything, Grace continued. You rush this part, you lose half the flavor. People get impatient. They want to move on to the next step. But good food doesn't happen fast. Robert had pulled up a stool and sat down, watching her work. Jean-Pierre remained standing, but Grace noticed he moved a little closer. She worked steadily, turning the short ribs to brown all sides, then removing them to add the aromatics. The garlic and ginger hit the hot oil, and the smell changed, became deeper, more complex. She added the star anise, let everything toast for just a moment, then deglazed the pot with wine. When did you start cooking for other people? Robert asked. Grace didn't look up from the pot. I was 12. My grandmother had arthritis in her hands, bad enough that some days she couldn't hold a knife. So I started helping more. By the time I was 14, I was making most of our meals. She added the stock, brought everything to a boil, then carefully placed the short ribs back in and covered the pot. Now it needs time. 3.5 hours, low and slow. And you just knew how to do this? Nobody taught you? My grandmother taught me, just not with words, mostly. I'd stand next to her in the kitchen, watching. She'd tell me stories about her mother and her grandmother before that. All these women who cooked to keep their families together. And somewhere in those stories, I learned what mattered. Grace moved to the collard greens, sorting through them, discarding any leaves that weren't perfect. When my mother got sick, cooking was the only thing that made me feel useful. I couldn't fix the cancer. I couldn't make the medical bills disappear. But I could make sure she ate something good every day. Something that reminded her life was still worth living. The kitchen was quiet, except for the sound of water running as Grace washed the greens. Even Jean-Pierre had crossed his arms. She loved butter beans, Grace said softly, cooked slow with ham hock and onions. Toward the end, when she couldn't eat much, she'd have just a few spoonfuls. But she'd smile, and she'd say it tasted like home. She paused, her hands still in the water. After she passed, I couldn't cook for almost a month. Every time I tried, I'd just start crying. My brothers were worried about me. But then one Sunday, I woke up, and I just knew I had to cook again. Because if I stopped, it felt like I was letting go of her. And all those women before her who'd passed down these recipes, these ways of showing love. Robert's voice was gentle. Is that why you never pursued it professionally? Because it felt too personal? Grace dried her hands and started preparing the greens, stripping the leaves from the stems with practiced efficiency. Maybe partly, but mostly it was just life getting in the way. My brothers needed help with college. Then there were other bills, other responsibilities. Time passed. I told myself I'd go back to it someday, But someday turned into 20 years, and then 30, and then it felt too late. But you kept cooking. I did. For church potlucks. For neighbors. For any coworkers having a hard time. I'd bring in food on people's birthdays, or when someone was going through something difficult. Cooking was how I connected with people. How I showed them they mattered. She started chopping the greens, and Jean-Pierre suddenly spoke for the first time. You're cutting those wrong. Grace looked up at him. You should be slicing them thinner, he said. More uniform pieces. Grace met his eyes steadily. With respect, chef, I've been cooking these greens for 40 years. This is how they're supposed to be cut. That's not how we do it here. You asked me to show you how I cook, Grace said calmly. This is how I cook. Robert held up a hand. Jean-Pierre, that's enough. I want to see your method. The French chef's jaw tightened, but he stepped back. Grace returned to her work, but her hands were shaking slightly now. She got the greens started on the stove with smoked turkey, onions, and garlic, then checked on the short ribs. The smell coming from the pot was rich and deep. Tell me about the Vietnamese restaurant, Robert said, clearly trying to ease the tension. Grace stirred the greens and adjusted the heat. I worked there for 5 years. Mrs. Nguyen ran it with her 3 daughters. They'd come over as refugees after the war, started with nothing. She saw I was interested in their food, and she started teaching me. Not formally, just by letting me watch, letting me taste, explaining what different ingredients did. And she taught you about the ginger? The star anise? She taught me that food doesn't have boundaries. That Vietnamese cooking and Southern cooking both came from people who had to make something beautiful out of struggle. She said the best cooks are the ones who aren't afraid to mix things, to try new combinations, to trust their instincts. Grace started on the grits, bringing milk and stock to a simmer, whisking in the grits slowly to avoid lumps. This part required attention and patience. Why did you leave that restaurant? Robert asked. Mrs. Nguyen sold it when she retired. The new owners brought in their own staff. I went back to just serving tables after that. Did you ever think about opening your own place? Grace laughed quietly. On a waitress's salary? That's a nice dream, Mr. Hayes, but dreams don't pay rent. She stirred the grits steadily, her arm moving in smooth circles. Besides, I'm not foolish enough to think I could compete with trained chefs. People like Chef Jean-Pierre, who went to real schools and worked in fancy restaurants. I know what I am. I'm just someone who learned to cook from her grandmother. You're wrong about that, Robert said. Grace looked up at him. You're not just anything, he continued. What you do is different from what culinary school teaches. It's deeper. You cook like someone who understands that food is about more than taste. It's about memory and connection and love. Grace didn't know what to say to that. She turned back to the grits, her throat tight. The kitchen fell quiet again, just the sound of simmering pots and Grace's whisk against the pan. Time passed. The short ribs braised. The greens softened. The grits thickened perfect creaminess. Finally, after 3.5 hours, Grace began plating. She tasted everything first, adjusting seasonings, making sure it was right. Then she carefully arranged each element on the plate. When she was done, she stepped back. It's ready. Robert and Jean-Pierre both moved forward. This time, Jean-Pierre took a bite first. His expression changed immediately. He took another bite, then another. Finally, he looked at Grace with something that might have been respect. This is exceptional, he said quietly. Robert tasted it and closed his eyes. It's even better than last night. Grace let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her legs felt weak suddenly, all the tension draining out of her at once. Robert set down his fork and looked at her for a long moment. We need to talk about what happens next. Robert gestured to the small office off the kitchen. Let's talk somewhere more comfortable. Grace followed him, very aware that her server's uniform was stained with grease and her hair had come loose from its bun. She felt out of place in this conversation. Whatever it was about to be done, Robert sat behind the desk and motioned for her to take the other chair. I'm going to be direct with you, Grace. I want to put your food on the menu here at Le Jardin. She stared at him. You mean like a special? One dish? No, I mean a whole section. A heritage menu that runs alongside the French cuisine. Your short ribs. Your collard greens. Whatever else you want to create. Real food, cooked the way you cook it, with your name on it. Grace's mind went blank. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I know it sounds crazy, Robert continued. And I'll be honest, my business partners are going to hate this idea. But I've been in this industry long enough to know something special when I taste it. What you make isn't just food. It's something people need, even if they don't know it yet. Mr. Hayes, I appreciate this, but I don't think you understand what you're asking. This is Le Jardin. People come here expecting fine dining. They pay $200 for dinner. They're not going to want comfort food from a waitress. First, stop calling yourself just a waitress. Second, you don't know what people want until you give them the chance to want it. Robert leaned forward. I'm offering you a 3-month position as a guest chef. You'll work with Jean-Pierre and the kitchen staff. You'll have creative control over your section of the menu. And you'll be paid properly, not server wages. But I don't have the training. I don't have the credentials. You have something better. You have soul. You have history. You have recipes that have been passed down through generations of women who knew how to turn simple ingredients into something meaningful. He paused. I'm not asking you to be something you're not. I'm asking you to be exactly who you are, in front of people who need to see it. Grace's hands were shaking. She clasped them together in her lap. Why are you doing this? Robert was quiet for a moment. My mother worked 3 jobs to put me through college. She cleaned houses during the day, worked at a grocery store in the evening, and did laundry for other families at night. She was one of the smartest people I ever knew, but nobody ever gave her a chance to be more than the help. He looked out the office window at the empty dining room. She died 2 months before I opened my first restaurant. Never got to see what I built. And sometimes I wonder how many other people are out there like her. Like you. People with gifts that nobody recognizes because they're too busy surviving to show the world what they can do. Grace felt tears pricking her eyes. She blinked them away. I'm not doing this as charity, Robert said. I'm doing it because I think it'll work. I think people are hungry for food that means something. And I think you can give them that. What if I fail? What if people hate it? Then you fail. But at least you'll know you tried. And I'll make sure you land on your feet. I'll write you a recommendation for any culinary position you want. You won't be worse off than you are now. Grace thought about her small apartment, her routine of work and home, and church on Sundays. She thought about her grandmother's hands, gnarled with arthritis, but still gentle when they touched her face. She thought about all the years of making food for other people without ever believing it could be something more. Can I think about it? She asked. You can have until Monday. That's 3 days. She nodded and stood up. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. I mean it. Even if I say no, thank you for asking. Grace, he said as she reached the door. Don't decide based on fear. Decide based on what you really want. The next 2 days were torture. Grace couldn't stop thinking about the offer. She went to work her regular shifts, but her mind was somewhere else. Her coworkers had heard about the cooking test, and they had opinions. You'd be crazy to turn this down, said Teresa, another server who'd worked there for 6 years. Do you know what kind of opportunity this is? But Anthony, one of the line cooks, pulled her aside with a warning. I've seen things like this before. They bring someone in to shake things up, get some publicity, and then 6 months later, that person is gone and everything goes back to normal. Don't get your hopes up. On Saturday night, Grace's friend Rita came over with wine and advice. They'd known each oath for 20 years, since their kids were in school together. What does your gut tell you? Rita asked. My gut tells me I'm 52 years old, and I should be grateful I have a steady job at all. That's not your gut. That's your fear talking. Rita poured more wine. Your gut is the part of you that got excited when he made the offer. I saw your face when you told me about it. You lit up like a Christmas tree. Grace sighed. But what if he's wrong? What if I'm not good enough? Good enough for who? Grace, I've been eating your food for 2 decades. I've watched people's faces when they taste what you make. You think those faces are lying? You think that man is lying when he says your food is special? It's different cooking for friends. Cooking for paying customers who expect perfection, that's something else. So you're going to spend the rest of your life wondering what might have happened. You're going to be 80 years old, sitting in a rocking chair, thinking about how you almost took a chance, but you were too scared. Grace didn't have an answer for that. On Sunday, she drove out to her grandmother's grave. She hadn't been there in months, and she felt guilty about that. The cemetery was quiet. Just a few other people visiting their loved ones in the distance. She sat on the grass next to the headstone and talked the way. She used to talk to her grandmother in the kitchen. I don't know what to do, she said. You always made things seem so simple. Cook with love, you'd say. Feed people and you feed their souls. But this isn't just cooking for family. This is something bigger, and I'm scared. The wind moved through the trees. A bird sang somewhere nearby. I keep thinking about what you used to tell me, that our recipes were gifts from all the women who came before us, that every time I cooked your dishes, I was keeping them alive. Keeping you alive. Grace touched the grass, pulled up a few blades, let them fall. Maybe that's the real question. If I don't do this, am I honoring what you taught me? Or am I wasting it? She sat there for a long time, listening to the quiet, feeling the sun on her face. And slowly, something settled in her chest. Not certainty exactly, but something close to it. On Monday morning, Grace called Robert's office. His assistant put her through immediately. Mr. Hayes? It's Grace Bennett. Have you made a decision? She took a deep breath. I have some conditions. I'm listening. First, I'm not trying to replace Chef Jean-Pierre or take over the kitchen. I want to work with him, not against him. Second, if this doesn't work, I want my old serving position back. Same schedule, same everything. I need to know I have something to fall back on. Done and done. What else? I want to donate 10% of any profit from my dishes to a culinary scholarship fund for people who can't afford training. People like I was. Robert was quiet for a moment. I think we can do better than 10%. Let's make it 20. Grace felt something warm spread through her chest. Then I'm in. Good. Can you start Thursday? I want to give you a few days to develop your full menu. Work with Douglas on ingredients and suppliers. Whatever you need. Thursday works, Grace? You're doing the right thing. I hope so, Mr. Hayes. Call me Robert. We're going to be working together now. She hung up and sat on her couch, staring at nothing. She'd just agreed to something that terrified her. But underneath the fear was something else. Something she hadn't felt in so long, she'd almost forgotten what it was. Excitement. Pure, genuine excitement about what came next. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rita. Well? Grace smiled and typed back. I'm doing it. Three dots appeared immediately then. About time. I'm bringing champagne tonight. We're celebrating. Grace set down her phone and walked to her kitchen. She pulled out her grandmother's old recipe box, the one with cards stained from decades of use, written in handwriting that got shakier. As arthritis took hold, she spread the cards on the table. Butter beans, fried chicken, peach cobbler, mac and cheese, cornbread, all the dishes that had fed her family through good times and bad. "All right, Grandma," she whispered. "Let's show them what we can do." For the first time in 30 years, Grace started planning a menu that had her name on it. And it felt like coming home. The first week was harder than Grace expected. Not the cooking part, it came naturally. It was everything else. The way some of the line cooks looked at her like she didn't belong. The whispers she pretended not to hear. The fact that she had to work twice as hard to prove she deserved to be their Chang-Pierre was professional but distant. He'd give her space in the kitchen, answer her questions when she asked, but he never offered advice or encouragement. Grace understood. She was disrupting his world, and he didn't have to like it. The real tension came from the dining room. When the new menu launched, Robert had insisted on adding a small note explaining Grace's section. Heritage Southern Cuisine by Grace Bennett, featuring recipes passed down through generations. The first night, Grace stood in the kitchen, hands shaking as orders started coming in. One short rib plate, then another, then 3 at once. She worked steadily, her muscle memory taking over, but her heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Douglas came back into the kitchen an hour into service. Table 12 sent their short ribs back. Grace's stomach dropped. What was wrong with them? They said they didn't come to a French restaurant to eat soul food. They want to speak to the manager about why we're serving this kind of food here. The kitchen went quiet. Grace felt everyone's eyes on her. This was what she'd been afraid of. This was proof she didn't belong, but Jean-Pierre surprised her. He walked over to Douglas and said, quietly but firmly, "Tell table 12 that this is what we're serving tonight. If they don't like it, they're welcome to leave." Grace looked at him in shock. He met her eyes and gave the smallest nod before turning back to his station. "Keep cooking," he said to her. "Don't let them stop you." So she did. Order after order. Some came back with compliments. Others came back untouched. By the end of the night, Grace was exhausted and discouraged. Robert found her in the kitchen after the last customer left. She was cleaning her station, moving slowly, her whole body aching. "Rough night," he said. 3 plates came back. People complained. I heard one woman tell her husband that we'd lowered our standards. I also heard about the 10 tables that asked to meet you personally to thank you for the food, and the couple who ordered your entire menu section just so they could try everything. That doesn't make up for the ones who hated it. Robert leaned against the counter. "Let me tell you something about this business. You can't please everyone. And you know what? You shouldn't try. The people who get it, they'll love what you do. The people who don't, they were never your audience anyway. But what if more people hate it than love it? Then we adjust. But we don't quit after one night." The second week was better. Word started spreading. A food blogger who'd been in on opening night wrote a review that went viral. She talked about how Grace's food made her cry because it reminded her of her own grandmother's cooking. How it was the most honest meal she'd had in years. Suddenly, people were making reservations specifically to try Grace's menu. The phone started ringing off the hook. Robert had to add more tables to accommodate the demand, but success brought its own problems. Grace was working 12-hour days, barely sleeping. Her hands hurt from all the prep work, and the pressure of knowing that people were coming specifically for her food was overwhelming. One afternoon, She was breaking down a tray of collard greens when Jean-Pierre approached her. "You're working too hard," he said. "I have to. People are expecting." "No, you're trying to do everything yourself. That's not how a kitchen works." He gestured to two of his line cooks. "Pierre, come here. And bring Thomas." The two young cooks hurried over. "Grace is going to teach you how to prepare her collard greens," Jean-Pierre said. "You will learn her method exactly, and then you will help her." Grace started to protest. "I can't ask them to." "You're not asking. I'm telling them. This is how we run a professional kitchen. We work as a team." Over the next hour, Grace showed the two cooks how she prepared the greens. How to clean them, how to cut them, how long to cook them, what seasonings to add when. They listened carefully, took notes, asked questions. Pierre, who'd been one of the cooks most skeptical about her presence, tasted the finished greens and his eyes widened. "This is incredible. How did you know to add vinegar at that exact moment?" "My grandmother's trick," Grace said. "It brightens everything up right at the end." "Can you teach us your short ribs next?" Thomas asked. And something shifted. Slowly, the kitchen staff stopped seeing Grace as an outsider and started seeing her as what she was. A talented cook with knowledge worth learning. By the end of the first month, Les Jardins had a waiting list that stretched 6 weeks out. Food critics were writing articles. Other restaurant owners were calling Robert to ask about his heritage menu concept. But the moment that mattered most to Grace came on a Wednesday evening. An older black woman came in with her daughter and granddaughter, 3 generations at one table. They ordered Grace's entire menu section. Douglas came back to get Grace. "Table 8 wants to meet you." Grace wiped her hands and walked out into the dining room, still nervous about facing customers directly. The older woman stood up when she saw her, and there were tears in her eyes. "I had to thank you," the woman said. "I haven't tasted food like this since my mother passed 15 years ago. You brought her back to me for one night. You gave my daughter and granddaughter a taste of where we come from." The granddaughter, who couldn't have been more than 20, spoke up. "I never got to meet my great-grandmother. But after eating this food, I feel like I know her a little bit. Like I understand something about my history that I didn't before." Grace's throat was tight. That's exactly what this food is supposed to do. The woman hugged her, and Grace hugged her back. And in that moment, she understood why she'd been so scared to do this. Because it mattered. Because this wasn't just about cooking. It was about preserving something precious. About honoring the women who came before and teaching the ones who came after. 2 months in, Robert approached Grace with another proposal. "I want to expand this concept, not just here, but as something bigger. A culinary program specifically for people who have talent, but no access to traditional training. Like a cooking school? More than that. A mentorship program. We bring in people from underserved communities, people working in restaurants who've never had a chance to do more. We teach them, we support them, and we help them build careers. And you want me to be part of it? I want you to run it." Grace shook her head. "Robert, I'm not qualified to run a program like that." "You're exactly qualified. You know what it's like to have talent that nobody recognizes. You know what it's like to be overlooked. You know how to teach people not just techniques, but the meaning behind the food." Grace thought about it for a long time. About all the years she'd spent wondering what if. About the young cooks in Jean-Pierre's kitchen who'd been so eager to learn from her. About the granddaughter at table 8, learning about her heritage through food. "Okay," she said finally, "but only if we do it right. No shortcuts. No making promises we can't keep. Deal." 6 months after that first night when Robert tasted her short ribs, Grace stood in front of her first class of students. 12 people from all different backgrounds. A single mother who worked 2 jobs. A man who'd been recently released from prison and was trying to rebuild his life. A teenager who'd aged out of foster care. All of them with stories. All of them with dreams. "My name is Grace Bennett," she told them, "and I'm not going to lie to you. This is going to be hard work. Learning to cook professionally isn't easy. Building a career in this industry isn't easy. But if you're willing to put in the work, if you're willing to be patient and learn and push through the hard days, I'm going to teach you everything I know." She looked at their faces, saw hope and uncertainty and determination all mixed together. "The most important thing I can teach you is this," Grace continued. "Food is more than just ingredients and techniques. Food is how we connect with each other. It's how we share our histories and our cultures and our love. When you cook for someone, you're giving them a piece of yourself. And that's a gift worth giving." After class, Grace sat in her small office and called Rita. "How'd it go?" Rita asked. "It was perfect," Grace said. "Terrifying, but perfect. I'm proud of you. You know that, right?" "I know." Grace hung up and looked at the photo on her desk. Her grandmother, young and smiling, standing in a kitchen from decades ago. Grace had found it in an old album and brought it here to remind herself why she was doing this. "We did it, Grandma," she whispered. "We're still here, still cooking, still feeding people, still showing love the only way we knew how." Outside her office, she could hear her students talking and laughing, comparing notes, making plans. Tomorrow they'd be back, ready to learn more. And she'd be ready to teach them Dot. It wasn't the life she'd planned 30 years ago. But somehow, it was exactly the life she was supposed to have. Just took a little longer to get here. Took one person asking the right question at the right time. Took one plate of short ribs and the courage to believe she deserved more than she'd settled for. Grace smiled, turned off her office light, and headed home. Tomorrow would be another full day. But she'd be ready for it. She'd been ready all along.